Parshas Re'eh. This one, as I say every week, each week begins sort of, uniquely, but this one I like how it begins. It's an interesting opening. It says, Re'eh, look, Anochi nosein lifnechem hayom, bracha uklala. God says, hey, take a look. I'm putting in front of all of you today a blessing and a curse. Right? So first thing is, what does it mean to look? Who are you looking at? You can't see God, and you can't see a blessing or a curse. So why does he use the expression look, right? To see something. We use it as an expression. I could say, listen to me, or don't you see this, right? And it means the same thing, right? But what is he saying? And then he explains, Esa bracha, what do I mean by the bracha? Asher tishma'u el mitzvos Hashem Elokeichem. You'll receive the blessing if you will listen to, or you will hear, so it switches from seeing to now hearing, the mitzvahs of the Lord your God, Asher anochi mitzaves kamayom, right? That I command you today. So he doesn't say you have to do them, he says you just have to hear them. V'haklala, and what is the curse? Im lo tishma'u el mitzvahs Hashem Elokeichem. If you do not listen to the mitzvahs that Hashem gives to us, v'sartem min haderech, and you go off the path, the right approach, Asher anochi mitzaves kamayom, which I have commanded to you today, lechas acharei Elohim acharim, so that you should go after idols instead of me. Like that's you're going away from me. Asher lo yudatam, which don't know you. So here's the introduction. God is saying, I'm giving you a blessing and a curse. Right? Choose whichever one you want. If you want the blessing, this is how you get it. You listen to what God says. If you want the curse, don't listen to what God says. That's basically all it tells you so far, right? So there's another number of things that we need to understand with this. First thing is the idea of Re'eh, you should see. Right? What does he really mean by that? So of course seeing doesn't really mean to see something, it means to understand. Right? Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Do you hear what I'm saying? Both cases means understanding. Right? What happens in general with people is that you and I could have the same thing happen to us and we see it very differently. And that's because that everything that we do is colored by all of the baggage all the years of our life. If every time you have an interaction with a man with a yarmulke and it goes bad, then the next one will go bad too, even though it hasn't happened yet. Because your perception is that you're highly sensitive to any negativity, and even if this one wouldn't go bad normally, and he was just ambiguous, you're going to presume he's bad because it's like racial profiling. Every instance you've had has been that way, so now this one is. It gets to the point where you have to wonder if all of them actually were bad, or if we just perceived them that way because a couple of them were, and we could have had actually more that weren't. We just didn't notice. So it's our perception. So that's exactly why it says later on, now how do you get the blessing? It says that you get the blessing, as he says, as a bracha asher tishmu, that you will listen to the mitzvahs of God. Right? So first thing, why does it say listen rather than do? Because the point here is a question of perception. The way that we perceive reality should be through the eyes of the Torah. That's how we should see the world. We learn in the Medrash that when Hashem created the world, he created the world by looking into the Torah and seeing what was needed. So if it said in the Torah you should shake a lulav, he had to invent lulavs and invent arms. Without the need to shake a lulav, he had no need to create an arm and a person, so to speak. Right? He created money because there's a mitzvah to give charity. So what was ever it was in the Torah first, according to the mysticism, the reality became from the Torah. So that's to say then the true perception of reality, objective reality, is through the eyes of Torah. That really tells us it. Anything else is subjective, and it's tied to all types of issues that could be in your life, in your upbringing, in your genetics, in your environment, in your culture, and all of those things affect us. But so it's telling us that if you really want to get the blessing, you certainly have to do the Torah. But in order to do the Torah, you first have to hear it. You have to hear what I'm saying in a objective way, and by doing so, you'll do it. The presumption here is that the Torah is something that I call the concept that compels. That is to say, if we sit down and you say to me, I don't follow the Torah, I don't know much about it, I'm a modern person living in the year 2014, I don't need the Torah. Like it tells me milk and meat, that's medical. We have refrigeration. We don't have to do that anymore. So that's what people will often say, right? Because they have a perception of what the Torah is, and if they need to have the Torah. So here, what he's saying to us is that I want you to, if you want to receive the blessing, the first thing you have to do is you have to hear and understand what the Torah has to say. If you do that, then your knowing the Torah will make it so that you yourself will choose to do it, because it is logical. Right? I always tell a story about how when I first started working. So one of my first positions was I worked in a college town in Boulder, Colorado. And it was a wonderful time to be there, and I had great life experiences. One of the things that happened is I was on campus. It's a very large university there. So so I also did like chaplaincy work on campus. So there would be times when they'd all meet, all the chaplains would meet. And of course in the first year, so I'm all excited, I'm going to go to the meetings too. So I go to the meetings and they all introduce each other. So you have this priest, let's say an Anglican priest or a Roman Catholic priest, and you have a bunch of ministers, and you got maybe one Muslim guy, and then you got the rabbi. And so they're going around the room and they're saying, okay, and what is your faith? And what is your name? And what is your position? And what is your faith? And it hit me after listening to this, although I didn't say it, I try not to be rude, but it was that you can't ask us that question, because we would not consider our religion to be a faith. It does contain faith, but the amount of faith in our religion becomes smaller the more you know. If you learn and study, then you'll know something, and you don't accept it, you critique it. It's like I always say, you should never believe what I tell you, you should always critique what I tell you. That's the whole idea of Torah. You think it through, make sure it makes sense to you. When a person does that, when you study Torah, you don't have to believe it. You know it. You either know it's true or you know it's not, right? So therefore, there's always a little bit of faith, because I can't prove God to you. So there's some faith in our religion. But some religions, they want you to believe things that are absurd, logically absurd, and that if you don't believe them, you're not a true believer. Like, in other words, in order to believe something, it must be absurd. If it's not absurd, why would you believe? Right? You'd know. So religions will purposely take absurdities and say, 3 is 2. Right? More is less. Right? They'll tell you statements like this. And if you believe it, even if it's not logical, then you're a true believer. You're a follower. Right? We have no such idea in our religion. Doesn't have such a concept of believing absurdities. Right? We have a concept of understanding things that could appear absurd, and then with enough knowledge, one can come up with conclusions. That's why it says that if a person wants to upgrade and to get more knowledge, they end up with less faith, because they have the knowledge. They don't need faith. I don't have to believe the Torah is true if I know it's true. I don't have to believe that giving tzedakah benefits the giver more than the receiver. I see it. I see it's true. So therefore, I have to have less and less belief. That's how our religion works. So it's saying to us that if you want the bracha, that all that God is asking from us to do is to listen and understand what the Torah says. If you do that, if you're intellectually honest about the Torah, you'll do it. I don't need to tell you to do it. You just have to understand it. So that's why it says, what is the blessing that I give you today? If you will listen to the mitzvahs of God, you'll have the blessing. Because by listening, you'll eventually do it. I don't have to tell you to do it. And then what is the curse? If you don't listen. Right? And what's interesting is that in the case of the blessing, it says, Asher tishma'u, a command form. You will listen. Right? And therefore you receive a blessing. In the case of the curse, it doesn't say command form. It says, and if you would not listen. Right? Im lo tishmu, if it is that you don't listen. Because a person's natural inclination is to do the right thing. And then we have an afterthought, usually, that is not the right thing. That is what we want to do. Right? We talk often about that in Judaism. There's a struggle between what I want to do and what I should do. I should get out of bed. I want to sleep late. I should not eat this whipped cream, but I want to have. But I'm not feeling happy. I'm not happy today. Right? One is what I should do. One is what I want to do. Sometimes what I want to do is what I should do, but very often they're not. And in our belief system, we want to do what we should do. And eventually, what we should do will become what we want to do. But we have to do what we should do. That's why it says, and if you would not listen, because you naturally do what you should do. Right? So therefore, you'd have to choose not to. So that's why it begins in such a way, with placing before us this. Now, there is another place where he also says, I put in front of you today a blessing and a curse, life and death. Choose life. Right? God actually gives you the answer. Here he's giving you a choice. Look, I'm giving you today a choice. You're alive. You can have a life of blessings or a life of curses. What would you like? Right? That's what he says. And the next one that he says, I am putting before you today a blessing and a curse, life and death. Choose life. Here God is telling us, I'm giving you a hint. I'm giving you the way. You can go blessing, curse, life, death. Which way would you like? So I'll tell you, as your friend, take life. Right? That's what God's saying. And it's like it's one thing if I'm dealing with a colleague and we're talking. It's almost insulting for me to answer the question for him. I say, okay, look, we have a choice. We can go together and unite our community and do this and this and this, or we can ignore each other, and people will think that we're fighting, and then it'll be a negative. What would you like to do? Right? If I say to him, and you should choose unity, I'm insulting him. He would know the answer to the question. He's an adult. What the right thing is. He may not want to do the right thing, or he may have a greater good that supersedes what I said. So that's fine. But if I'm talking to a child, and I tell the child, you have a choice. I can give you an ice cream or asparagus, right? If you want the truth, take the ice cream. Right? Tell a kid why, because a kid doesn't necessarily know. A kid needs that your experience, your life experience, your knowledge, that one of them is going to be good and one is not going to be good. One is right and one is not right. So in that case, even though you set in front of them ice cream and asparagus, they know the difference. They can see the difference. They know they want the ice cream. Nevertheless, you tell them to take the ice cream, because for a child that's not insulting. For a child, you push them to do the right thing because their desire to do other things is not necessarily good. So they have to be educated. They have to exercise their goodness in order to do that. So you tell them. So here, in this first case, God is just telling us. In the second case, he's telling us and answering the question for us. So he's dealing with both types of people. Right? You'll often hear from secular philosophers that religious people are people who need a father figure. They need somebody to tell them what to do all the time. That way they feel more secure. Because when they were kids, they had a father and a mother tell them what to do. It was easy. Life was easy. You didn't have to make decisions. You couldn't do anything wrong. Whatever you did what your parents told you. And by definition, you were doing right. Right? But that's not necessarily the way the world works. That's the way it works, with parents and a child. But with other people, it's not necessarily the same idea. And so when we have to make choices, right, we have to try to make the choices the right choice, and the Torah tells us that. That's why he's telling us as an introduction here, reality, right, the real world is that world seen through the eyes of the Torah. That's the real world. And we use the expression differently. When we sit in yeshiva, we go, when I go out in the real world, after I'm done with yeshiva, right, the fact is that the real world, while the yeshiva doesn't have all of the temptations of the outside world, it is that the real world is seen through the eyes of Torah, not seen through the eyes of the secular world. They see errors, right? We see it because the Torah is what God used to create the world. It was the blueprint that he created the world with, and that's the basis for why it says this.
So did he write the Torah first and then create the world?
Well, it says that 6,000 years before the world was created, God wrote the Torah. And then it says that he looked into the Torah and created the world. Now, you understand this is not literal, right? Right? By definition, God wouldn't have to write the Torah and then look into it to create the world. If he wrote the Torah, he knows what he has to do. Right? It's a lesson. It's not necessarily a true story. What it means is that true reality, the reality, like if you have a question, this person, I want to keep Shabbos, and this person is sick and has to go to the hospital. What do I do? What is reality? Do I save their life, or do I keep Shabbos? Which takes precedence? So we have to know an answer. You can be in a society that's a pagan society that says the human life is not worth very much, so you should keep your religion and don't save the life. You can be in other societies that would say life takes precedence over all religions. Religions are just fables. Let's reject the religion and save the life. So where do we stand? So Judaism says the reality of the world is God says human beings' life takes precedence over ritual. God says that. And God created the ritual, and God created the human being. So therefore, we know the reality. That's what it means when we say that the world was created from the Torah, because that's the reality. When you take off, on the Wizard of Oz, when you have to go in the back there, and there's no more smoke and mirrors, and you see this little guy in this big giant machine, right? When you take away all the smoke and mirrors of the world, it's the Torah tells us what the real truth is. When we have an unmarried young girl who gets pregnant, right, does she have an abortion, or does she stint her future by having a child and carrying that child with her the rest of her life? Which is the right thing? If somebody's suffering in the hospital and they ask you to take their life because they're suffering so much, do you do it? What's the right thing? Society, every 30, 40 years, changes their opinion on these things. The half-life of ethical belief in our society is very short. We have an answer, and that answer has been the same answer since day one, because the Torah was first, and the Torah gives us the answer for the world. So now we know how to answer it. That's what it means when it says that. Okay. So let's go through some of the specific ideas that he talked about in here. There's this couple of interesting commandments. Let's see. Okay, you have here a false prophet coming in. Let's talk about him a little bit. And on page 1006, 1007, it says, the entire word that I command you, that shall you observe to do. You shall not add to it, and you shall not subtract from it. So rule number one, the Torah is telling us, God is giving us the Torah. Don't add to it, and don't take away from it. Don't say this mitzvah doesn't apply anymore. Oh, remember we talked about milk and meat? And we have refrigeration today, so you don't have to worry about the meat spoiling and then eating it with milk, which will proliferate the bacteria and cause you to be sick. You don't have to worry about that. We have refrigeration. But that's if you believe that the Torah is a health book. If God gave us the Torah and said don't eat milk and meat because he wants to keep us healthy, it's sort of unnecessary. He could just make it that it's healthy. He created us. He can make it that we don't get sick from it. The Torah is not a medical book. There may be things in the Torah that are medically sound, but it's not a medical book. It's a book of spiritual rules. How do you live your life? So when it tells us don't eat milk and meat together, it's because on a cosmic level it has an effect on the world, not because it makes you sick. So to say, well, I don't have to keep this law of milk and meat anymore because now we have refrigeration and we cure the meat and people can eat pig and they won't get sick, or they can eat these different things and they won't get sick. Right? The fact is it has nothing to do with that. The Torah was created first. God knew there'd be refrigeration. God created these, right, because of the spiritual fact within it. So that's what it's telling us. So here, we can't take away from the Torah. You also can't add to the Torah. You can't say a law and say that God has said it to be the case. For instance, we all have these different customs of how long do you wait to eat milk after you eat meat. And we have a rule. You can't have milk and meat together. So really, the Torah says you're not allowed to cook milk and meat together. It doesn't say you can't eat one after another. It says you can't put them in a pot and cook it and then eat it. Right? Cooking it is forbidden and eating it is forbidden, both. So you can't do that. So does it say that I can't cook meat and eat it and then a minute later cook milk and then eat it? It doesn't say that anywhere. That's rabbinic law. The rabbis came and said, we want to help people not break the Torah because that's serious. So we're going to tell you that you have to wait the time between 2 meals before you can switch between meat and milk. You eat meat, then you got to wait the amount of time till the next meal, depending on how many meals your society has, 2 or 3, 6 hours, 3 hours, right? You have to wait until it's time for the next meal before you can have dairy, switching from meat to dairy. That's only a fence, because that way, if you don't break the fence, you won't break the law, right? And if you break the fence, you may not break the law, but at least it keeps you from breaking the law, right? So if anybody would say that's not rabbinic law, that's the Torah, they'd be adding to the Torah. You can't do that. You can't say the Torah says you have to wait 6 hours after eating meat before you have milk. Nobody can say that. The rabbis say it, and the Torah gives the power to the rabbis to do so. The Torah says that we have to listen to the rabbis, because the rabbis will lead us and teach us how to apply the Torah and be able to live it, right? Well, otherwise we won't understand it, or how to do that. We have to study it ourselves, but we have to understand it. So the rabbis came and said, well, you know, so many people are going to mix milk and meat together and eat it by mistake. We're going to say you have to have 2 separate meals. It's not God saying it, it's us, right? So that's okay, because they're not adding to the Torah. If they would say it's God saying it, then it's actually against the Torah to say such a thing. Then it says, and if someone stands up among you who's a prophet or a dreamer of a dream, and he'll give you a sign or a wonder, and the sign of the wonder happens, of which he spoke to you, right? And then he says, let's go and follow other gods. You shouldn't do what he says, right? You should actually kill him. So what do you have? If you look at the words of the Torah, we're not talking about necessarily a fraud, right? We're not necessarily talking about a person who pretends to be holy. It certainly would include such a person. But here it says, you even have a prophet. He's a real prophet. That means he's close to God. This guy worked on himself and became close to God. God talks to him. Right? We don't have such people today, but there were people like that. God spoke to him. There were women like that too, by the way. And by God speaking to him, he was a holy person. And then he decides he's not going to do it anymore. He's going to go worship idols. So he comes and he says, I'm the great prophet of God, and I'm telling you, you have to come with me and worship idols. Right? You might think he's a prophet of God. I better listen to him. He says, no, you don't listen to him. You take him out, and because he's dedicating himself to hurting people, spiritually hurting them, he should be killed. Such a person has lost his right to live. You shouldn't be afraid of him, even though he might be a prophet. So this tells you an amazing thing, and I think this can be understood even in our time in other ways, which is no matter what position a person's in, they're not infallible. It could be your rabbi, it could be your teacher, it could be a prophet, it could be anyone of any stature. They're not infallible. That means that they can make mistakes, they can fall, they can do the wrong thing, and it's them who are doing it, not the Torah. We've had cases now, with the internet and the ability to see people and take pictures of people and follow people, right, has gotten to such an extent that you basically can create all types of disasters for people that you couldn't before, because you can follow them around, you can watch them, you can see them. They have access to all types of things that they wouldn't have had access to before, and now it's people can become corrupted, and you have all types of problems because of it, including rabbis, including religious leaders from other religions, including political figures, all types of ethical people who appear to be leaders get caught doing unethical things. Right? It happens all the time, and people will often say, you can't say anything. You don't want to give a bad name to the community or a bad name to the family. You can't say anything. So you certainly can't say anything bad. Like, you can't talk lashon hara. You can't talk negatively about people. But you also can't encourage people to not get proper treatment and get things taken care of. If a person's been abused by a person in a position of power, right? We don't just say that person in a position of power, he must be holy. This kid must be lying. No, we have to look into it reasonably. We don't have to presume that the guy did it, but we have to look into it, because you can't just allow this type of stuff to continue just because a person is in a position of power. So even a prophet, right? Who is a prophet by definition is proven, right? You can have a rabbi who could trick you into being a rabbi. That's possible. He may be a smart enough guy who's not a rabbi who could pretend to be, and he could be totally corrupt, but he could pass by and you might not notice. But a prophet, right, means that God has like put a stamp on this guy. This guy has worked on himself and achieved great spiritual levels. Now, and the way that you know it is that I talk to him. Right? That you could go see a prophet and say, I'm engaged to this woman, should I marry her? And he can look into your soul and tell you yes or no if you're the right one for each other. He'd say, I want to become a doctor. Should I be a doctor? And he can look into your soul and say, no, your soul is the soul of a lawyer. You really should be a lawyer. You won't find happiness as a doctor. And they would be right every time, because it's not them, it's God. So, right? And then that same person comes and tells you, convert to another religion. But like, how would you see that? So the Torah is telling us these things happen. People can go crazy. Even a prophet, even more so if it's a rabbi in your community, if it's a leader, if it's a priest, if it's another person. People you cannot presume that everybody is always good. And I had a teacher once like that, I'm sorry to say, who was an extraordinary figure. He was charismatic, he was terrific, and he got himself in trouble. There was a real uproar over things that he did that were not right. That years after I knew him, I hadn't seen him for a long time, but he allowed himself to become corrupted. He abused the power that he had, and it was so shocking because we're not used to seeing that with people that we know. But it is possible, and we can't say we got to hide it, put it, sweep it under. Just we'll take care of it ourselves. We can't do that. We're destroying lives that way, and here the Torah warns us about that. And it goes on, it says, even if you look in verse 7, if your brother, the son of your mother, or the son of your daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend, who is like your own soul shall entice you, right? In other words, here in 109, he says, if your own brother, who's, right, that is, right, your full brother, your half brother, or your sister, or your wife, come to you and say, let's give up this Judaism and go worship another religion. Right? Even them, don't listen to them. You shouldn't give in to them. They're wrong. Because anybody, no matter who they are, it can happen. They can become corrupted. Right? Even a parent, even a child, even a relative. It's not telling you don't trust people. It's saying don't give total trust to people. Don't have blind faith in people. People are fallible. Have faith, but not blind faith. And it tells you here what happens in such a case. We have the laws of kosher that are in here, and one of them is a very interesting one. If we look on 1012, 1013, you'll see with verse 11, it talks about birds. So it says, every clean bird you may eat. Right? So clean is really a poor translation. It doesn't mean not dirty. It means that it is kosher. It comes from the word tahor. Tahor means that it has spiritual abilities, which means it's a kosher animal. So every kosher animal you can eat. And this is what you shall not eat from among them. And it gives you the names of certain birds, right? The nesher, the paris, the osnia, the re'eh, the ra'ah, the ayah, the dayah. And it goes through all different ones that you shouldn't eat. And then it tells you ones, right, and one of the ones that it tells you shouldn't eat is called the chasidah. It's down at the end of the sentence. It has the number 18 before it. So the chasidah, most people say, is probably like a pelican. We're not really sure. A stork, a pelican, something like that. So there's an understanding, the Talmud says, what birds can you eat? Birds that have good personality traits. That is, not a bird that eats other birds. Like not a meat-eating bird, not a violent bird. Not that the bird is an ethical animal, but it says that God gave it traits, right? Like a hawk has a different trait than a robin. They're going to act differently. They eat differently. They do things differently. So it's telling us the animals that are more docile, that are more simple, those are the ones that are kosher. So birds, he tells you by name. This one is, this one is, this one is. And then you see a common thread that they all have, that the ones that are kosher are all ones that are sort of vegetable eaters or, bugs and stuff like that. And they're not violent, right? They don't come and tear apart people and things. right? Or eat dead things, right? They're pretty simple birds. Those are the kosher ones versus the ones that are not kosher, which have these traits that are negative. So it goes through and it tells you many positive things about different animals. And the Gemara says, so there's one called the chasidah. Chasidah is you're not allowed to eat, which is funny because chasidah means she who does kindness. Right? That's what it says. Now, what does this bird say? The commentaries tell us right on the page that it's called the chasidah because it does kindness. This is a bird that will go out of its way to help other birds. That's a pretty kind thing. Even if it's not literally true, the Torah is giving us a message. Right? It's telling us the chasidah will do things while other birds don't really care. Like you have some birds that are in here because they have mates for life. Like a dove is a bird that has a mate for life. Most birds do not. Right? So they have different traits. So this chasidah is known that it will befriend and assist other birds if they're in need. Right? But yet it tells you it's not kosher. Right? It should tell you then therefore it is kosher, because I told you positive traits are the kosher birds. Negative traits are the unkosher birds. So here I give you one that's name means it's nice. It's nice, and the rabbis say it's nice, and yet it's not kosher. So we learn an important lesson. If you look in the words of the rabbis when they say that it's nice, it says that it's nice to its friends. This bird is nice to its friends, which means that it's nice to other birds like it. Right? Not nice to other creations, but only nice to those that are like it. Which is to say that I'm nice, but I'm only nice to the people who are like me. If you're not like me, I'm not nice to you. I don't care about you. In fact, you might not even be human. Right? You're the Asians, you're not human. You're black, you're not human. You're Jewish, you're not human. You're Christian, you're not human. Right? This is what happens in the world. But we take people who dehumanize them. We take away their humanity. And they are human. If they're black, or if they're Chinese, if they're white, if they're Christian, if they're Jewish, they are human. Right? You can't take that away. The chasidah is saying, I do nice things, but only for ones who are like me. And that, the rabbis say, is not a good trait. That's a bad trait, to be like that. To say that I'm only going to take care of, how far do you want to go with it? Only take care of my family and let the community fall apart? Only take care of people from my hometown, but not the other, my neighborhood, not the other neighborhood? People who pray in the shul like mine, not the other one. People who send their kids to school where my kids go, not the other school. Like, where do you draw the line? As soon as you start drawing lines, you're the chasidah. You're saying, I will do kindness, not for when kindness is needed, but for when kindness is needed by those who are like me. That's not positive. So that's why the chasidah is put in there. Okay, let's see what else we got. Okay, yeah, here we got one. On 1014, 1015 on the bottom, it says, at the end of 7 years you shall institute a remission. This is the matter of the remission. Every creditor shall remit his authority over what he has lent his fellow. What we have here are the laws of loans. There's a rule in the Torah that says that you should lend money to other Jews. Why do I say other Jews specifically? Because of the word in here. Sometimes the word is used in the Torah that says that you have a commandment to do something to your people. Sometimes you have a commandment to do something. When you have to do something in general, it means all humans, Jews and non-Jews. There are certain rules that only apply Jew to Jew, that don't apply to us with non-Jews. Like for another Jew, I'm not allowed to lend him money with interest. But I am allowed to lend money with interest to a non-Jew. Now this, of course, became a big issue when the Christians began to develop power, because they said, you see, the Jews treat us different. They won't charge interest to each other, but when it comes to us, they'll do whatever they want. So that's patently false. But the truth is, and the Torah says, we're not supposed to charge interest to each other. We are allowed to charge interest to others, but it has to be a reasonable interest. It can't be usury. It can't be a great amount of interest. You can't be a loan shark. That you're not allowed to do. But why is it? Why is it that the Torah seems to distinguish between lending money at no interest to Jews, but lending money with interest to non-Jews? Like, is it that we have to first ask, is lending money with interest evil? Let's say I have a business, and you travel from out of town, and you want to do business in my town. So in order to do so, you have to get a car. You need to drive around. I got 10 cars. I'll rent you a car so you can do your business in my town. Should I make a profit on that? Any reason I shouldn't? Of course I should make a profit. Why not? I have the cars. You need a car. It costs me $25 a kilometer, 25 cents a kilometer for you to use my car. I'll charge you 50 cents. I'll make 25 cents. You do your business. You're happy. I'm happy. Everybody makes a living, right? That's business. Nothing wrong with that. So how come if I have money and I want to lend you money, I can't charge you interest? It's also a profit. You want to come to my town and do business. You need $10,000 to do business in my town. I got $10,000 that I don't need. I'll lend it to you. Give me back $10,100. And I gave it to you. Why is that different than lending you my car and charging you a profit on my car, or a profit on my hotel room, or a profit on making you dinner? Why not? It's the same thing. So the Torah says it is the same thing. However, people usually borrow money when they're in trouble, and they borrow things when they want to make a living. Right? Not that it's always the case, but most people will borrow your shovel, right, because they need to do a job in their backyard. Right? They'll borrow money because they're in debt, because they need money. So if you charge interest to somebody who's in debt, they'll never get out of debt. They just get more and more in debt. We all know this to be true, right? You start out, you go to a bank and you get 8% loan, and they don't have you can't pay. So you go to a credit card and you get 20%, and you pay off the bank loan, and now you owe 20%, and it gets worse and worse, and it keeps compiling, and now you're out, you're stuck. There's no way out because the interest keeps increasing. But so the Torah says there's nothing wrong with charging a reasonable interest to somebody. They have to be responsible for themselves too. However, you wouldn't do that to your brother. If your brother was in trouble and he needed money, right? That's why I said money is when you're in trouble. He needed money. Your real brother came to you. Would you charge him interest? So in most cases, people would say, no, I wouldn't charge my brother interest. He needs $10,000 for a business for 6 months. I'll give him the $10,000. He'll give it back to me. He's my brother. Jews are brothers. That's what the Torah says. We're brothers. We need to remember that we're brothers and sisters. We all care for each other, and therefore, when you are lending money to another Jew, you're lending to your brother. You don't charge interest. But did you charge interest? It's not evil. You just don't do it to your brother. You can charge a non-Jew interest because they're not your brother. So you see, in that case, we distinguish between Jews and non-Jews. Not because we make it worse for non-Jews. We happen to favor Jews in this case because they're our family. But there are many cases where we don't, where it's the same. Here, right, we have the ideas of lending. So now we can understand why we would charge interest to a non-Jew. It's not like they're making it out that that charging interest is evil, and therefore we will do it to non-Jews because they're not human. That's not at all true. Charging interest is not evil, and non-Jews are as human as we are. They're just not Jewish. They're not my brother, but they are people. I have to treat them with dignity, right? And there are many mitzvahs the Torah uses reference that includes non-Jews that I have to do. I have to do kindness to non-Jews. I have to give charity to non-Jews. I have to make sure a non-Jew is taken care of. I have to help him so he doesn't lose his life. I have to treat him medically. Right? I have to give him all the dignity of the world. Right? But he's not my brother. It's different. My brother comes into my store. I don't charge him full price. And a stranger comes in, I'll give him an honest price. I'm not taking advantage, but I'm not going to give him what I charge my brother. That's understood. So that's what that says. And then it goes on and it says that a person will take out a loan, right? And he gets himself in trouble. Now, how does he get out of trouble? Let's say a guy steals something, steals money, and he uses the money, and he gets caught. Now he used the money. How's he going to pay back the money? How does he make money? He steals. So I'm going to just get him to go steal so he can pay me back? You can't do that. So the only thing he can do is he sells himself into slavery. The person who owes the money. And to be a slave in the Jewish world is not such a terrible thing. You don't want to do it because you're basically working for 7 years to pay off a debt. At the end of the 7 years, the debt is paid off. So you're out of it. right? You don't have that problem anymore. And you have to be treated with dignity. It says if your owner, who's you sold yourself to as a slave, has one pillow, you get it. If he has one blanket, you get it. If he has one bed, you get it. If someone gets fed first, it's you. If there's only enough food for one person, you get it. So the owner has to treat the slave with amazing dignity. It's not like our concept of slavery that we see in the world. Jewish slavery is very different. But then it says in our pasuk, the last line on 1017, it says, for destitute people will not cease to exist within the land, right? There's always going to be poor people, so you may have to end up taking slaves. You shall surely open your hand to your brother, to your poor, and to your destitute in your land. On the one hand, you should open your hand, you should give charity to people. And you notice what it says. It says, open your hand to your brother, so that means to other Jews are a priority, and to your poor, right? That's other people that are living there but further away. And the destitute in your land means even non-Jews. Anybody who needs, you have to take care of. But one of the things it says in the case of slavery, after the 7 years, it says you should not let him go out empty-handed. But the fact is, he should go out empty-handed. He owed me $100,000, so I said, fine, you can't pay me because you stole from me. You can't pay for me. You have to work. You can work for me for 7 years for free. That'll pay back the money. I'll take care of you. I'll feed you. I'll take care of your family for you, everything. I'll treat you, you'll have your own room, everything will be great for you, but you work for free, right, for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, you walk out, no debt. That's a big deal. Anywhere else, you're going to be in debt the rest of your life. I'm helping you out, right? But then the Torah says, I can't send him out empty-handed. Well, why not? The guy's got no debts. How many of us can say we have no debts? We don't owe anybody any money, right? And start with zero. It's probably ahead of all of us, right? This guy's got no debts, and he walks out. So it's an interesting thing to understand this. Why you should give him something. It says the Torah says give him something, some money to go with, even though you don't owe him anything. And so this is tipping. This is a source of tipping. You're giving him a tip. So what is the idea of a tip? Like, why is it there are certain people you give tips to and certain people you don't? For instance, we give a tip to a waiter, but we don't give a tip to a salesperson. Like, when a person is like bringing us out. We walk into a restaurant where you pick up the food, right, at the buffet, and you pay the steward, the woman behind the register. You don't give her a tip. There's no place for tips, right? Just go and sit down. But if you sit down and somebody comes and serves you, you give them a tip. Well, there's a big difference? Not a big difference. If when a person, goes and parks my car for me, I give him a tip for parking my car for me, right? But I don't give like the gas station guy a tip for giving me gas. So what is it why is it certain things that you give tips for and certain things you don't? It's that we don't even think it through, but we all know the answer. In general, the answer is that we tip people because they provided a service, and in general, when someone serves you, it's demeaning to them. Not necessarily seriously demeaning, and you can treat them very respectfully, but it is. There's a certain idea that I go to a restaurant, you come and serve me, you're below me in the social scale. That's why you're the waiter, I'm the guy coming to buy the meal. I'm spending $100 on a meal, you're making $5 an hour. Right? I'm a higher level than you. That's not how you're supposed to look at it. I'm trying to illustrate it. What that's basically saying is that the waiter, will get a chip on his shoulder. He'll say, "Who do you think you are? You think I'm less than you because I'm a waiter?" That's because people do, right? And in any type of profession that a person has, that other people have to interact with regularly, and that person provides a service, especially a service that you don't want to do, because it's demeaning. Like, let's say, getting your shoes shined in public, right? It's sort of a demeaning position, right? You wouldn't want to do it, so you give them a tip. You give it. What you're doing is anybody who does something for you where they may feel demeaning, we give them a tip, so they should feel that they did something extraordinary for us. We're giving them money because it's not because they're less than us. They're doing this. They're so good at it that we're paying them extra to do it. We're paying the waiter to do it, even though I don't need the waiter, and the waiter didn't do much, but I'm giving them money. Now, we don't necessarily sense that fact that they're demeaned, and we don't necessarily, we certainly don't want them to feel demeaned, but it's a reality. That's what happens here. You have the slave. He sold himself as a slave because he got in trouble. Now, we gave him an out. The Torah gives him a way out, but it's but it's a way out that's only done because because the slave did something wrong. It's demeaning. For 7 years he has to work in your house, and yet you have to treat him with the greatest dignity. But the bottom line is, every day he comes and brings you your breakfast, he knows because he stole from you, and the court said he had to pay you back, and he has no way of getting money, so he had to do this. So he's demeaned. So at the end of the period, you can just say, fine, you don't owe me anything, get out of here. Right? You stole from me, you don't owe me anything, you can go. You can go now. Time's up. You can do that, and he'll feel like a lowlife. Or you can go to him and give him $100 and say, here, I just want to give you this. You did such an excellent job with what you did, and you got rid of your debt. He doesn't feel demeaned now. Now he feels like he's special. So the Torah tells you, give the money or don't give the money. You have to make people feel special. That's the important thing. So when somebody comes, for instance, I get this all the time. People come and they'll do something for me. So I'll say thank you. Right? We should always do that, right? You should always say thank you. But how about if they're paid to do it? Like your mailman. Your mailman brings the mail to your house. Do you say thank you? He's paid to do it. A newspaper guy. You say thank you? He didn't go out of his way for you. He's making money on it. It's costing you money to do it. The answer is that yes, you do. That because someone did something for you, regardless of the reason they did it, you say thank you. You show your gratitude. It gives a dignity to that person. The mailman who has a route where his people on the route talk to him is a much happier employee than one who doesn't. Even though the one who they talk to him, he hears all their problems and their craziness and the tensions, and he's fighting with this one, and this one's not happy, and this one's got that problem. Right? If you don't talk to anybody, you just put things in a box. Right? You should have a much better life. You don't. Yeah, people get much more satisfaction when the people that they do things for show gratitude. So we should show gratitude. That's for no other reason, because then it makes people happy. And the more people that are happy, then they act happy. Right? You know, they had this whole idea before of pay it forward, right? Where I'm going to do an act of kindness, not because you did one for me, but I'm going to do one. I'm going to pay it forward. Right? I'm going to do an act of kindness, and then other people can do an act of kindness. So I'll go to Starbucks and I'll buy me a coffee, and the guy behind me a coffee. And then if the guy behind me goes to pay for his coffee, they say it was paid for, then he should say, okay, I'm going to pay for the guy behind me. Right? That's called paying it forward. That can be, funny, or it can be real. But if you do that with gratitude, with showing respect, that changes the world. That makes a world of difference. If that guy who, washed your car for you and just hands you the keys, you say thank you, right? It's a great job, right? Even if it's a silly job, to wash cars for a living, nevertheless, he did a good job. Say thank you. You paid him? Sure. Give him a tip? Okay, give him a tip. Don't give him a tip, say thank you anyways. Whatever it is, you want people to feel that way. And that's extremely important. That's what the Torah is telling us. It's not necessarily so important that you give him a significant amount of money when he leaves your house. The idea is to make him feel like he does. I'll tell you a story, and then we're pretty much getting towards the end. So in the story, it says how, I'm sure it's a made-up story, but it's about this reporter, investigative reporter. He hears about all these different places they go to. So he writes about sociology, about different cultures, anthropology. That's right. He studies culture. So he goes and he hears about this one place where there's all these islands. Each island has its own king, and each king has multiple queens. And the king buys the queens from her family that are his subjects, and he pays the father money. And he gives a dowry, but the father keeps it. So the average price for a woman was, let's say, $100, right, that they paid. And for a queen was like $500. The king would go out, he would give $500 to any man whose daughter that he married, right? While the average guy would give $100 to the father. So the guy hears that on this one island, this one king gave $5,000 for this one woman. Right? She must be amazing, right? $5,000, like 100 times more than anybody else gave for a wife. This king gives for a wife. He's got 20 wives, but this one wife, right, that he paid $5,000 or $50,000, whatever, enormous amount of money. He decides, I'm going to go there and find out. I mean, it's got to be an amazing woman. I'm going to write a story about this king and how he spent all this money and got this wife and how amazing she is, because she's got to be a natural. She grew up on an island. I mean, how sophisticated could she be? This little island. So he comes out there, and he gets invited for dinner, and he sits there and he talks to the king, and he says, okay, you got to tell me, what's with the queen? $50,000. Like, that's crazy. That's so much money for a woman. What was so special about her? He says, well, you meet her. He brings her out, and she's dignified and sophisticated, and she dresses nicely, and she speaks politely, and she's, really put together well, and she's doing everything great. So the guy says, you know what? I understand. She's really a special woman, but $50,000. That's like 100 times what anyone's ever paid for a woman ever. Like, are you crazy? You couldn't have gotten her for $10,000? So the king says, $50,000? I got a $50,000 wife. It doesn't matter if she's worth $50,000. She believes she's worth $50,000 because I gave $50,000, and she knows that to me she's worth $50,000. So she's going to be sophisticated and kind and giving and caring because she knows to me she's worth that kind of money. Right? That's the idea of showing gratitude. We show people that we really care, that it's really true, these things are true, then we're able to get them to act that way. People will rise to the occasion. I tell a joke, but it's not a joke. When I do marriage counseling, which I do quite often, one of the things, I'll quote the Talmud. The Talmud says that a man is required to treat his wife better than he treats himself. And a woman is supposed to treat her husband like a king. So in both cases, there's a little difference, but they're both mean. They're supposed to treat them with great dignity and respect, right? So a woman, and we're talking, a woman comes to me and she says, look, I love my husband. He's a wonderful man. He works very hard to provide for us. He's very kind, but he's no king. He's a schlep. He doesn't know how to dress. He doesn't know how to act. He's relatively crude. I know he loves me and I love him and he's the greatest man in the world, but he's not a king. How am I supposed to think of him as a king? The answer is if you treat him like a king, he'll be a king. If you treat him in a way that there's an expectation of him being sophisticated, dressing nicely, acting nicely, speaking correctly, then he'll act that way. Treat him that way, he'll act that way. That's how people are. So the Torah tells us, treat people that you show them your gratitude, that they're worth something. They'll act like they're worth something, and they'll be worth something, and it'll be a better world.